Hi, good morning. Good
Hello.
morning. Good morning. This is Andre Marcus speaking. I'm the director of the European Roundtable on Climate Change and Sustainable Transition. And this is ETS revision for phase 4 draft report by the rapporteur of the ENVI committee. And we are letting people stream in. The speakers are here, or some of the speakers are here, but as we wait for a few minutes, hopefully all the speakers will be here. So we'll wait for 2-3 minutes until we have people streaming in this. We're waiting for Peter Liese, who is the rapporteur of the ENVI committee, of course, who is going to speak about his draft report, and then we will have a panel that will react with Axel Eggert for Eurofair, Levrate from Norcidro, Jakob Hansen, head of Fertilizer Europe, Eva Chamizo from Iberdrola, Domin van Genechten from E3G, and of course, some last but not least, Sam van der Plas for Carbon Market Watch. So I would ask you to bear with me for a few minutes until we get all the speakers on. Thomas, would you check, please, maybe with Melanie, what is happening with Mr. Liese? Because I'm not. Hi, Eva. Good morning as well. There is Mr. Liese. You always have trepidation until your speakers show up.
Hello. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. While we wait for a moment, I will recall the only moment that my first meeting, or one of my first meeting in Brussels, was Margot Wallström, and this was when the initial directive was being put forward, and she had been named Commissioner of the Year or something like that. And Margot Wallström was Delbecq, and Peter Wiss walked into the room about 15 minutes later, and this was one of my first meetings in Brussels ahead of AIDA, so I was having a heart attack. And I said to Margot Wallström, I said, listen, my blood pressure just went up. What just went down? And she said, well, this is the first time somebody's told me that. So I think that she has a great sense of humor. So look, Peter, welcome. Thank you very much for taking the time. Obviously, a lot of demand on your time these days. Everybody wants to listen to the rapporteur of the ETS directive, and together with your other colleagues, including Mr. Shahim, who we had last week discussing the CBAM directive. We have the way we'll do this. I think we should proceed right away for you to make your presentation, speak about the item that you want to highlight from your draft report, and then we have a number of stakeholders: Axel Eggert from head of Eurofair, Levrate from Norcidro, Jakob Hansen, head of Fertilizer, Eva Chamizo, the head of the office of Iberdrola here in Brussels, Domin van Genechten from E3G and formerly a colleague. Welcome back, Domin. It's good to see you. And Sam van der Plas, of course, who is in charge of this area in Carbon Market Watch. So now, Mr. Liese, you have the floor. Without getting into too many niceties, I think we're eager to listen to you.
Yeah, thank you, Andre, and good morning, everybody. I'm happy to have the opportunity to explain a little bit the main points in my draft report and the way forward. I got a lot of reaction publicly, mainly from the NGOs, it's not ambitious enough. And from industry, oh, this is too challenging. It's quite of normal, but behind the scenes, I have to say that I got a lot of positive reactions from key stakeholders and colleagues that think this is really something we can build up on. And I would ask everybody if he likes something in my report, if he or she likes something in my report, please don't hide it, because it's not a given that the things that you like will easily fly and the things that you don't like will disappear if you criticize them only hard enough. If you like something, and that's always more challenging to spread positive news, you need to fight for it and not to say, okay, this is fine, but. Somebody told me time ago, what is before the but is a lie. So please say we don't like this and that, but these are positive things and we need to work together. We need to get it done. I think the key message of my report is the key message of, I think, all of us here in this meeting, that to really do the transition, we need a carbon price. It is very well stated in the IPCC special report on the 1.5 degree target that we need a carbon price. And I think nobody should forget it when we see challenges, when we see different opinions. If IPCC says a carbon price is needed, nobody should say we can make it without a carbon price, because if we don't trust science in climate policy, we are lost. And if we don't achieve our targets, our children and grandchildren are lost. So let's work on the details, but let's not challenge the principle that a carbon price is needed to really trigger the innovation. We have seen in the existing ETS, since we have repaired it, and I'm grateful a lot of people here in the chat were helpful to do the backloading, to establish the MSR, and to support the review that we did in the last period. Since 2017, in fact, it works. And the emission, especially in the electricity sector, went down dramatically. That, for example, the country I know best, Germany, has achieved its very ambitious 40% target last year, is to a very small degree due to COVID, but to a big degree due to the fact that ETS finally worked. Coal was less attractive, gas and renewables are more attractive. That alone doesn't do the trick. We need a policy mix, very clear, but without a carbon price, it will not work out. And that you can see in the transport sector, where emissions in the same time, when they went down in the electricity sector, went up. And I think that's the main reason why we can see without a carbon price, it will just not work. What is very important for me is that we need a more targeted use of the revenues with a strong social component. Everybody that behaves climate friendly should be better off. So the climate friendly choice must be the attractive choice. And I'm sure that we all together, and all lawmakers in Europe and the national capitals, we don't have enough good ideas to regulate every single situation. So if people choose this or that way in transport, for example, if they go by bicycle or if they go by train or buy a new low or zero emission car, that is due to individual circumstances, and all these choices must be attractive, and you cannot really regulate this because it may change every day. When it rains, I need another alternative. I cannot go by bicycle, and we cannot make a law that you shouldn't go by car, but by bicycle, because we never know when it will rain or not rain. So let's the market work. But people need to be enabled to reduce the emissions. Carbon price shouldn't just be an increase of energy costs, but it should be the tool to reduce emissions and energy costs in the future. And that's why the targeted use of revenues is so important. And that is valid for all the three elements of the ETS. ETS 1 for industry and electricity. A lot of money disappears, and it should be invested in the transition and nowhere else. It is true for the maritime sector, and it's also true for the new ETS 2 for transport and heating. In detail, what do I suggest? In the ETS 1, my message is we need to decarbonize industry, but we should avoid a deindustrialization of Europe. And that's why I think we need to have a much more targeted ETS 1. We need to support breakthrough technologies, and there are very positive elements already in the Commission proposal, like the new benchmarks and also the provision that if you decarbonize and normally would fall out of the ETS, you will still get free allowances for 5 more years. So this will create a lot of cash flow for companies that do this very expensive investment in the direction of carbon neutrality. On top of that, I suggest a so-called bonus-malus system. I think the existing ETS is not targeted enough. When you are the best performer, you just get no burden, but not really an incentive. You just get no burden. And when you are above the best performing plants, you still get a lot of free allowances, even if you are not really on the pathway to climate neutrality. And I think this must change. That's why I suggest a bonus that the average of the 10% best, so that those that are better than the benchmark, will get an additional bonus so that they have really an incentive to invest, and this best investment pays off. And the second point is the malus. If you are above the benchmark and don't have a credible plan for climate neutrality and live up to this plan, the free allowances will be reduced by 25%. And I think this is very important because I always defended free allowances, and I will come back to this. But I have the feeling there are two types of companies. Those that are really committed, and Axel Eggert is with us. I know that many steel companies have a clear plan for decarbonization. So do many chemical companies and others. But there are also companies that think, okay, we don't believe in climate neutrality. We want the free allowances to continue business as usual. And then someday when it doesn't pay off, because it's also not more state of the art, we will just close the plant and send the people home. And that is not the future of European industry, I see. We need decarbonization, and it needs to be credible. Then to avoid carbon leakage, to avoid deindustrialization is another key point for me. The problem of the Commission proposal, in my view, is that even the best performers cannot be sure that they get enough free allowances in the end of the period. And I think that's a problem, because if you are the owner of a plant and you see how you can develop your future. You have your climate neutrality plan ready, but it's obvious that you cannot be climate neutral in 2030 in all industries. Technologies are not yet mature, and you need to go step by step. If you are the best performer in 2030 or 2028, you're still in danger of being punished, even if you are the best performer and are on the right track. So this is counterproductive. That's why we need to avoid the linear reduction factor to be kicking in. And I suggest 3 concrete proposals to get additional free allowances. First, to advance the date of full auctioning in the maritime sector. Second, in agreement with Sunčana Glavak, the rapporteur on ETS aviation, 1 year earlier, full auctioning in the aviation sector. And if that is not enough, we would also use some allowances from the MSR. But depending on how ambitious we are in aviation and maritime and how the market develops, we may not even need this. And then a very important point, which got quite some positive reaction from experts, is the CBAM reserve. EPP Group and me personally, we think CBAM is necessary. Unfortunately, we see on the one hand, a very positive development globally. The commitment to carbon neutrality, to climate neutrality is strong. I was very impressed in Glasgow from the commitment of many third countries. But the short-term targets for 2030 are in almost no place so ambitious than in the European Union. So we will have a competitive disadvantage for European industry without a proper protection. So, and CBAM is an interesting tool, but we are not sure that it works. And some of you know that I was witnessing a serious problem of implementation European legislation in ETS aviation. All the institutions agreed that we need to cover flights from and to third countries. But someday the pressure was too high and our heads of states and the Commission president gave in. I think that was a mistake and they should not be repeated, and the world has changed. So the priority for climate change is dramatically more clear for everybody. But still, we don't know if CBAM really works. And that's why I suggest a targeted amendment that the allowances that are no more given to the CBAM sector because they think they are protected with CBAM, that they are not cancelled or used for any other purpose, but put in a reserve for every respective year. And in the end of the year, if CBAM worked, fine. If it doesn't work, additional support with these free allowances is necessary. Next point on ETS 1 is a solidarity. Solidarity is necessary. We have challenges in Central and Eastern Europe, countries like Romania and Bulgaria, which shouldn't be ignored. And I'm in favor of solidarity, but it should be more targeted and we should be really clear. And also these countries should reward what already happened. You know, the modernization fund exists, the European regional fund exists, a lot of other funds exist, and still the Polish Minister for Environment, the Vice Minister, told me, oh, we have a big problem because many of our poor people are depending on coal for their heating. You know, where did all this money go? Where did the Polish spend their money if they are not able to help the poor to get a bit more efficient heating system? So you cannot argue that coal is unavoidable for heating houses. So this is really outrageous. The money should be spent on purpose. And we have a lot of solidarity. 30.7 6.5 billion euro will be channeled with the solidarity mechanism in the ETS, 10% of the revenues given to the Central and Eastern European member states mainly. On top of that, we have a modernization fund, 2%. And the Commission is proposing now a top-up of the modernization fund, another 2.5%. And this leads to very strange consequences because due to calculation reason, not only the countries benefiting until now will be covered, but also on top of that, Greece and Portugal. And this creates additional problems. We have already the problem, for example, in Slovenia, which doesn't benefit from the modernization fund, but Croatia and Hungary do. So in the border region, there's real competitiveness disadvantage for Slovenia, and my Slovenian colleagues addressed me on this. We will now have an additional problem in the border region of Spain and Portugal. Portugal will benefit, Spain will not. And I think now it's really time to rethink and to have a different approach. That's why I suggest the top-up, not the 2% that we already have. That will be plenty of money because the carbon price increases or has been increasing. But the top-up should be distributed not for member states, but for regions. We have a good example here. The Just Transition Fund is also helping regions in all parts of Europe that are challenged in particular. And the other half of the top-up should be used for the Innovation Fund, because innovation is finally what will do the trick. Now, after the publication of the draft delegated act on taxonomy, the focus of the debate is, of course, even more than before on how do we deal with gas and how we deal with nuclear, and that should also be looked at in the funds. Now, the Commission has suggested that no fossil fuel, so that would also exclude the most modern gas-fired power plant that will be transferred in carbon neutral gas in a few years, cannot be funded by the modernization fund. And they are silent on nuclear. So after the debate of the last weeks, I think that's not appropriate. And that's why I think the easiest way is just to focus the modernization fund on the priority projects that are already there. And the industry committee suggests to increase the priority project like energy efficiency, like renewables, to 90%. I think the easiest way is to say 100%. So then it's clear and everybody knows that this money will be spent on purpose. I skipped some points because time is limited. One word on maritime ETS. I think it's high time to include maritime, and I'm in favor of even advancing the scheme for maritime, so full auctioning in 2025. But we need also here a more targeted use of the revenues. And that's why I suggest, in line with the European Parliament's position from 2020 on the MRV, that we have a dedicated fund for maritime. All money that is not used for own resources for Next Generation EU should be used for innovation in the maritime sector, because it makes no sense to put a burden on maritime and use the money for other things, because shipping is the most environmental friendly mode of transport. Unfortunately, also the less regulated, so they could pollute much less, but it's not the idea to bring the goods from the shipping to the lorry. That's why also the ETS2 is so important, that we have a good balance here and not give a burden to shipping and not to lorry. So that's why the targeted use of the money is here very important, because modal shift is not the target when it comes to maritime. It should be modal shift from the lorry to shipping, or from other modes of transport to shipping. Last point, the new ETS. I think it's really an important part, indispensable part of the Fit for 55 package. And I'm very happy that more and more stakeholders from NGOs, industry, and more colleagues are ready to support it, of course, under conditions. And I fully agree that the Commission proposal needs to be improved. Unfortunately, I'm the only one until now that has made a proposal how to improve. I listen to many people that say, oh, it should be improved, but no concrete proposal. And that's why also here, I encourage everybody to look at what you like and not what you don't like. And I'm sure that it is important to increase the scope of the scheme. The Commission didn't include non-road machinery. They didn't include process heating and also other uses of fuel. So you will have the strange situation that if the Commission proposal is implemented, the construction company needs to have the burden of the ETS and needs to calculate also for the lorry that brings the construction machine to the construction place, but the machine that emits a lot when construction is done, like Caterpillar or so, that is not covered. And the same is for a company, an SME, that uses part of the heating for the building, other half for the process heating. They need to distinguish these two parts of the use. And I think that is not appropriate. All emissions should be covered. And this may also be the solution for a specific problem that we have in ETS maritime. Like in the existing ETS 1, there is a threshold and very small emitters are excluded. But that could create a problem, and is created already a lot of polemic, because luxury ships are smaller than the big tankers, and they are not in the scope of the Commission proposal. So if we include all fuels in ETS 2, then they are covered. And the argument of an administrative burden is no longer valid, because the provider of the fuel needs to hold the certificates, not the one that uses fuel for the small ship. And at least inside Europe, that would be a very elegant solution. That's why I really ask you to support the increased scope for the ETS 2. Then what got the most attraction is, of course, my suggestion for an opt-out for private transport and private building. And to be honest, it is not something I really like, but it's something that has been raised in the discussion. And many colleagues said, we need a compromise, and the compromise could look like this. So a distinction between private and commercial. Important is, of course, that commercial operations are in the common market, and there should be a level playing field. So there is an argument that private consumption can be treated different. I don't think it's a long-term solution. And then, of course, we will have other problems in separating these two uses of the fuel. It is possible. And now the idea comes, of course, as you know, from the French government and their allies like Pascal Canfin. Pascal told me they have checked that such a separation is possible. And the question is how we do it exactly. I think it should be a limited opt-out, and it should also not affect the Social Climate Fund. So if member states opt out, they should still pay for the Social Climate Fund, and they need to find other revenues to enable people to do the transition. The link with the Social Climate Fund is crucial. I strengthen this in alignment with the draft report of Esther de Lange and David Casa on the Social Climate Fund. All money should be spent on purpose. And it shouldn't be limited. It shouldn't disappear somewhere in the budget. 25% should be in the fund. And the 75% that are going to the member states' pockets should be spent according to the same rules. And that is not affected by this opt-out. I think that is really, really important. And final sentence, in the end, that's why I don't suggest to exclude this sector completely, but a timely limited opt-out. In the end, all emissions should be covered by a price. Like UN Secretary General Antonio Gutierrez said at COP26, carbon should be given a price. Thank you very much for your attention. I have to leave at 11 to another important meeting. So if there are questions directly to me, maybe you raise it now or at least before 11, but I'm also willing to listen to the other stakeholders. And as you know, I'm always open for discussions. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And I really hope we get things done and we can say to our children and grandchildren, we were helpful. And finally, we managed to limit greenhouse gas emissions and to limit climate change. And we didn't use superficial arguments, political arguments, and we were not like typical politicians. Typical politicians, people say they look only for the next election and not for the next generation. We should do the other way round. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. The one thing that I'm not going to take time, but the only one thing that I would say is that we normally have about 60% of the people that register. Well, I can tell you that you beat that record by miles. So the numbers that have come to this meeting are much higher than in previous meetings. Shows the interest that ETS continues to hold about the stakeholder. Let's go directly to the stakeholders, to Axel Eggert, because I think they'd be quite keen for you to be able to listen to someone's intervention. Ladies and gentlemen, 5 minutes, please. Otherwise, somebody's gonna be left out. Axel.
Thanks a lot, Andre. Good morning, everyone. Thanks a lot, Peter. I cannot agree more with you that, of course, we have to work together for the future generations so that they have a better environment and a decarbonized economy. It's all about the question how we reach this and how we can secure that the prosperity of Europe will continue and the measures are not damaging that prosperity. So you have made good proposals, interesting proposals. You have an open and comprehensive approach, not only looking at the industry, but also including other sectors relevant for the EU's climate objectives, buildings, transport, shipping, waste incineration. You are proposing some incentives to uptake low carbon technologies in industry, such as conditionality for free allocation, solidarity, very important point. You have an approach on promotion of carbon capture use and storage, but I think also we need to discuss, and I hope we can discuss with you, Peter, in the next few weeks, some improvement, how this can be strengthened so that we can achieve the objective that we start really now the big projects for decarbonization of the industry, and at the same time, those who invest can be profitable in 2030. I'm starting now with this date. And it's very clear that all sectors of the economy need to contribute to that objective. Please let me briefly remind you that the EU steel industry has set itself a very ambitious target, minus 30% by 2030. That is 76 million tons of CO2 in just 10 years. That means 25 billion euros of capital investment, 45 billion euros of operational costs, or even more if the energy price continues to increase. This just in 10 years. And this is compared to 1990 levels, 55% for our sector. The objective is clear, carbon neutrality by 2050. This objective has been set out together, Eurofair and our companies. And I just come from a meeting with the CEOs of the 10 largest steel companies in Europe, and we had a discussion. It really all depends on the enabling framework and the manageable costs. We must not forget that with the carbon price that has increased by over 700% since 2018, and with stunning EU energy prices, the risk of carbon leakage has already increased significantly now, endangering more and more our competitiveness. If industry does not decarbonize, we can shut down, of course. Then industry has to shut down, it's very clear, because of the high carbon price. But on the other hand, if we decarbonize using new technologies and renewable electricity, natural gas in the transition, hydrogen, then we risk also to shut down because of the high energy costs, which we not only see now as a temporary phenomenon because of the gas crisis, but which we see coming with the demand supply of the energy we will need. We will compete on that with other sectors that will further drive the price. The carbon price itself at 100 euros is doubling the wholesale electricity price in Europe. And the price is this morning at 82 euros, I think. So we have to consider that as well. So we need the tools to secure that the investment really pays off. And you have there some ideas, but I think we should discuss how to further improve that, in particular on the conditionality of free allocation, also on the phase out of the CO2 free allocation in the CBAM, where you have a reserve for that to protect the industry if it's not working. But I think we should do this a bit in a way that first prove the efficiency of the CBAM before reducing further free allocation. And we need only 2-3 years to prove that. And then really, if it's proven, then reduce the allowances. So let's please discuss in the next few weeks how we can find a good way forward for that. Setting new benchmarks with alternative technologies, which is now the planning of the Commission already in 2026, that would reduce our free allocation already by 40%. If we then account the free allocation reduction under CBAM, our free allocation needs will drop by 75% in 2030. So even if we achieve our own ambitious target, 30% down in our emissions, even the best installation has still a shortage of 45% in 2030. So we have to discuss how to make sure that this constellation is not leading to take investment decisions for other destinations and not for Europe. Last sentence, because my time is running out. Bonus malus, interesting, but we have this actually already. We have in this primary steel making blast furnace route one installation which is below the benchmark, because we have only 25 installations. So only that installation would already benefit today from that. So let's discuss how this can be also improved somehow. So I think also last point, rebasing. Please, we achieve the target without rebasing 2030. If we do rebasing, we further increase the costs for the society. Don't forget that, also for households, why this is in our view, not needed. Thanks a lot. I stop here.
Lev?
Good morning, everybody. I have sent you some slides, Andres. I hope you can show them.
Yeah, Thomas, you want to show the slides, please?
And thank you, Peter, for taking time off so we can give you feedback. And I will certainly like to do that, and that you will see them also on my slide. But as an introduction, can you hear me? production, I would just say that I come from Norsk Hydro, Europe's largest aluminium company. And just before Christmas, we also launched a target with regards to cutting our emissions by 30%, and also set the goal of being net zero in 2050. And today we can deliver aluminium with a carbon footprint of 4 tons per ton. That is far below the average in Europe. That is almost 7, whereas in the average of the world is almost 17. So Europe needs more aluminium, and aluminium should be produced in Europe to then supply to that increased demand. It's not only aluminium sector that also have products that are less carbon intensive than what is a global average. And that is very good. But at the same time, with the new ambition we have in Europe, we are facing a CO2 price that is 6 times higher than the second most ambitious regime in the world. And now we are also then having goals that are far above the other regimes. And that means higher operational costs and also requiring then new investments. Is a big challenge, and is a bad combination with regards to them having those costs at the same time as we need to carbonize very speedy compared to the others. So I appreciate very much your view on protecting industries as an important goal going forward. So let me start then with looking at your proposals. Then starting with the CBAM. As Alex mentioned, we would rather like to have a sort of trial period to see if the system is testing. That being said, when you then start to take holdback allowances, we think what you are proposing is a good system actually, because you say, let's hold them back and look how this is actually functioning on a yearly basis. Because if you don't see a transfer of the extra cost to the price, the CBAM is a failure. So that is very important. And also that you are proposed to have this evaluation done and given the result back after 2 months after the year. That is also important. And then we will also propose, coming with the additional things to your input, with regards to then allowances that are held back, if there are cases when they should be transferred back to installation, that should be done before the compliance. That has to do something with the market itself, okay. Then you propose it with the cross-sector perfection factor. Great, we need to avoid that factor. And we also support all your ideas for how to do it. And in particular, we support your idea of using the allowances set aside in the MSR to be invalidated, because we need to be aware of what many of the allowances in the MSR are actually there due to good causes, due to reduction happening in the EU ETS, due to the EU ETS. And we also have an additional proposal with regards to having extra flexibility with using trend as we have today. We have the 3% flexibility between the auction share and the free allocation. That should be kept and increased. Because to protect industries in these critical 10 years, or it's only 8 years remaining, it's important to have flexibility in the system to assure that. Then we are very happy to see that you also support the system we have today for indirect cost compensation. It's not perfect, but it is improving as more and more countries are giving compensation, and the level they're giving compensation is also increasing. Further, we also approve what you are saying with regards to innovation fund and increasing the amount to be transferred for new investment. Next slide, please.
Liv, I think we're running out of time. I'm sorry. I think that we can't go through all the slides.
But I'll go very quickly through them. We also support all your ideas with regards to negative emissions and also CCU. There are some weaknesses in the system today with regards to CCS, because it seems to be targeted on carbon fuels and not for process emissions. And that we should be aware of. And then we also think that this system should not be limited, because we have a lot of installation in the EU ETS today that are brownfield, but have the best technology implemented in the world with regards to energy efficiency and also direct emissions. So that should be considered as well. Next slide, please. Then with regards to what we think is missing there, and that is benchmark update, because all fallback benchmarks fall under one group. And to say that small installations and needed installations in the EU today, like aluminium recycles, that cannot use hydrogen, that cannot use biofuel, and the cost and the chemical reaction, if we do substitutes, make it impossible for us to do the change presently. So we think it should be new subsectors for aluminium recyclers, a sector needed in the transition. Then dynamic allocation, 50% is far too high. No other region in the world have this 15% dynamic allocation requirement. We think we should do what others are doing. They use the previous year's production level, and in case you need a percentage that is below 3%. My last slide, please, Andre, and then I'll finish in some seconds. We need to look at the price containment mechanism. It's really not functioning, and the requirements are too high. It needs to be changed at least so it only look at 3 months, and the average should be only twice what it should has been the price increase over the 2
Liv,
preceding years.
let's wrap up, Liv.
And the wrapping up will be then keep LRF as the only one for getting to 61%, and the bonus malheur system, I think it doesn't serve its purpose, because it will benefit some few, and the most of the installation in sector today have more or less the same level of emissions per tonnage. So it will be random who will get it, and it doesn't necessarily either stimulate the best performer to implement new technologies.
Okay.
That was very fast go through.
Thank you, Liv. Let's move on to Jacob Hansen. And Jacob, be merciful.
I will be very merciful. Thank you very much, Andre. And Lisa, I want to say to you that I really respect and I appreciate your openness and your way to discuss with different stakeholders. And that is nice to see. And it's also that you come here and talk to us today. It's great. And I also like that you challenged us to point to the things we like in your proposal instead of just criticizing. I think that was a very nice challenge to be put. So I will talk about 3 things. I will talk about ammonia. I will talk about the CBAM, where I will focus a bit more on the export side. And then I want to talk about investments and benchmarks. So these are my 3 points. And I will start with the point I like the most, Mr. Lise. I like that you highlight ammonia in your report as an important fuel. And the reason I say that from the fertilizer industry, for those who don't know it, is that the fertilizer industry, we produce 80% of all ammonia at the moment. So we are, the fertilizer producers are at the moment the ammonia producers. And ammonia is a fantastic product, which is more dense in hydrogen than hydrogen itself. And it will become the workhorse of the hydrogen economy. So I think it's well deserved, and I really like that you recognize this, Mr. Lise. It's an important thing that needs to be in your proposal, so that's good. On CBAM, I like your idea about a carbon leakage reserve mechanism, but I cannot be, I would have loved to be like it even more, because I think there's one thing here that's missing, and that's the discussion about exports. And you can say it's not really your responsibility because you are doing the ETS. But the fact is that the most obvious thing to maintain the export capacity of European industry is the free allowances. And I can say a lot about that, but fundamentally for me, it's about whether we in Europe want to continue to be part of the global economy, whether we want to continue to be able to export products that are low in emissions, and thereby helping also on a global scale to reduce emissions. And you talk about all the positive things that came out of Glasgow, maybe, but I can tell you the industries that we are competing with the most are not really going green. So I don't feel this positiveness about it. And therefore, I feel we need to go back and not reduce the free allowances for the CBAM sectors as fast as you are proposing. And I would like you to review that in your proposal. That would be my thing to you. And finally, in relation to investments and benchmark, I noticed that you said that carbon should have a price. And I can tell you from an industry point of view, and what a price at the moment. I mean, we have seen a dramatic change in the price of carbon. So it's not only has a price, it has a very, very high price. But carbon is not the only factor in taking investment decisions. I know my colleague or Eva from Iberdrola is here, so we need more renewable energy as a basis also for investments. And we need predictability. And this is where I come to the benchmarks, where I would like to see that we say benchmarks should not be changed until 2030. And I like what you're trying to do in order to avoid a linear reduction factor, because it really is key, Mr. Liese. You know, when you take investments today, it's going to take 3 years to do them, minimum, right? So you need some kind of predictability before you make the decision. And these things are important for the transition into a low carbon economy and a low carbon industry. So what you can do to make sure that when you sit and make decisions 5 years later, you don't suddenly know where you are in terms of your benchmark. That is also very important. That's also part of your proposal. So overall, Lisa, I like that you are willing to discuss with us. I think it's great. And I have pointed to things I really like in your proposal. And then I leave somebody else to point to other things that they like. So thank you very much.
Look, it fell upon my former colleague, Domine and Sam, to be at the tail end. But Eva, you go first, especially that you be referred by Jakob. So please go ahead and welcome. But you have to unmute yourself.
So thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you, Mr. Liese, for being here and listening to us. We as Iberdrola belong to the group that you have more in the ambition side, rather than saying we're reluctant to go on. But we think that your opinion is extremely good, that, as you say, we need to find a balance and that we need to protect our industry. So we are very happy in finding solutions for our industry to be competitive and not disindustrialize Europe. There are some points that I would like to insist on. First of all, what I would like to ask you and the European Parliament in general, because member states seem to be a bit lost, is remembering the necessity of carbon pricing. The raise of energy prices that we are seeing is not due to the ETS, it's due to gas, and ETS is the main tool to really fight against decarbonization. So any measure that goes into imposing parallel costs to low or zero emission investments is going to hamper the ETS. I mean, if a steel producer goes through a procedure to produce green steel, what will happen if he has to pay a parallel amount to ETS? Is it necessary then to decarbonize? So it's the ETS, it's a stake. So this weekend there will be an informal accounting, and I think that we need all the help from the European Parliament that we can get, because as you say, carbon pricing is essential. How we fine tune, how we help industry, and how we recover it is, of course, the center of what we have to see now, but the danger is coming from the putting at doubt the whole system. In terms of social, we think, and we absolutely agree with the need that the vulnerable and the industry are the main points to be taken into account in order to not produce reactions against the ETS. But at the same time, when you talk about keeping the free allowances or reserving them, we would be a bit more ambitious and say, well, maybe we need to cancel them and to see what other ways we can use to help our industry, but not business as usual, because if not, we're perpetuating the emissions. So we think that there has to be a balance, there has to be help, but the cancellation of free allowances, and this is where CBAM is very important. We need a progressive procedure in order for companies to see how it goes. So it's not going to be applying from the very first moment. So a progressive dispersion, but it has to disappear. In terms of funding, we very much consider that the Modernization Fund and the Innovation Fund are essential. But there is one thing that we would like to point out in the Innovation Fund. The Innovation Fund has to prioritize all those investment and technologies that go to non-emitting. So those are the ones, the first problem that we need is we need not to emit. And then, of course, we have to remove those emissions that we inevitably have to do. But let's go first to prioritize technologies that do not emit. And then there is an element, and I think that Mr. Hansen will agree with me also with the questions that he suggested. We have an alliance to decarbonize fertilizers in Spain with Fertiberia. What we see is that we are pushing for green hydrogen. These companies are making a huge effort to try to clean their way of production. And we see that inside the European Union, we're still not doing the necessary. In the ETS, hydrogen, grey hydrogen gets free allowances. So we will never be able to push for green hydrogen, even if we think as a proposal of the Commission that we could give them free allowances, the equivalent of free allowances as well. It's too late, it's not mandatory, and overall, what we need is grey hydrogen to fuel the carbon price in order to reform. So we will include it in the CBAM because it's not been included by the Commission. And then just to tackle the transport and building question, we are very happy with the sensible proposal that you were doing. We think that it could be a solution to permit the opt-out for private people until 27, but we don't think that eliminating all signal of carbon for these sectors is the solution. So we would very much go for your opt-out until 2027. So that was all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eva. Now, Peter, I think that if you find 5 minutes in a pocket somewhere, it'd be great. Else the environmental community is going to hate me forever because they will see conspiracy somewhere. Domin and then Sam. Sorry, guys, I'm trying hard.
No worries. Thanks a lot for the invitation, Andre, and thanks to you, Mr. Liese, for taking the time to discuss your report with us. I work for E3G. We're an independent climate change think tank, working across Europe, but also internationally with offices in DC. And I'm a policy advisor working on industrial decarbonization. I guess we're part of the environmental community, and indeed my intervention will be a bit different from the 4 speakers we've heard so far. But I do want to start with commending you and your work. I do think it's a comprehensive report with a very clear vision, especially around higher ambition in aviation, maritime, for the ETS to faster implementation, larger scope, etc. There are very good elements or ambitious elements in there. However, I do think that those ambitious elements are not necessarily translated for ETS1 as well, and especially not for industry. I think within ETS1, as you said, you've highlighted the importance of reinvesting climate revenues, ensuring that the funds go 100% to priority areas, etc., updating benchmarks. Like, there are very solid elements in there. But I think overall, it has a very strong focus on ensuring that industry or the carbon price signal for industry remains muted, and that there is enough reallocation available indefinitely to ensure industry doesn't face that carbon leakage, that carbon pricing signal. A few of my colleagues here have spoken about the high carbon price. Obviously, there is a very high carbon price, but also let's be honest, industry is not fully facing that carbon price because it gets a large majority of its allowances for free. I mean, for us, our priorities are getting the ETS right in this crucial decade for industrial decarbonization. And for us, free allocation is definitely not a climate measure. It's impeding climate ambition and climate action. And it's the one element that we need to get rid of or try to get rid of in the next decade. Otherwise, this will be another lost decade for industry. So I guess in light of that, I'll focus my intervention on 3 points. One is indeed that linkage between CBAM and the current carbon leakage provisions. I think as E3G, we've always been very skeptical of CBAM, given its international dimensions and sensitivities, but we've been supportive of it as an environmental tool, especially because it provides that alternative to free allocation. It could give us a way out of this deadlock we're currently in. And the way the Commission has proposed it, with this very slow phase-out period, which you do not address, Mr. Liese, as well as the carbon leakage reserve that gets implemented, which, in my opinion, is very prone to gaming the system and a lot of lobbying efforts by incumbents to ensure that that carbon leakage reserve will flow back to industry. I think this is a step backwards and not the necessary, or does not show the necessary level of ambition for industry to decarbonize. A second point is around some of the proposed amendments to ensure that the cross-sectoral correction factor is not implied. I had a look in the motivation, and I think you're right that you do this in order to avoid disincentivizing best performers and innovation. I think there are better ways to achieve that objective, and ensuring that enough reallocation is available for everyone across the board, not only those best performers, is not the right way to go. If we want to keep free allocation for a longer period of time, I would rather look at ways to reform the cross-sectoral correction factor, for example, by ensuring it only targets the worst performers and not the best performers. That would already be a big improvement from what you have suggested. I think lastly, I want to touch on the bonus-malus system, which I think is one of the more interesting ideas for sure. And a lot of people are thinking about this, but this needs to be thought through more deeply. I think the mandatory climate transition plans is a very interesting proposal, which needs to be fleshed out further. Like, we are very supportive of increasing governance elements and making sure that those climate plans are in place. So I mean, I commend you for proposing this. However, I think the malus part lacks teeth. If the first review process is review would only be after 2030, we would only see a reduction in free allocation for those companies not, on the right path towards climate neutrality after 2030, which is way too late. In combination with giving 10% extra free allocation to better performance, we're just increasing the pot of free allocation altogether. And I don't think that's the right way forward. There are other issues here around potential double protection for those best performers in combination with CBAM, etc. So there's quite a few technical elements I think we need to work on and flesh out further. But yeah, very, very keen to working with you in the future and making sure that the ETS is fit for purpose. And I'll stop here. Thanks a lot, Andre.
Sam, thank you, Peter, for indulging us. Sam, please.
Thank you very much. I think the issue might have been here a free allocation of speaking time based on activity levels. We know this leads to some imbalances sometimes, but it's perfectly fine. And Mr. Liese, thank you. We have talked a lot already. From my side, don't feel obliged to stay on if you do need to leave out. I fully understand. You're a very busy person. Because I also want to talk, I mean, there's a large audience here, so I think it's important to look at a couple of things. And one is scientific basis, and this was mentioned as some of the drivers. I don't think this is so much about ambition, but it's about taking responsibility for limiting the climate crisis. And this is something I need to put out at the start of this discussion. We may be somewhere going fit to 55, but we're not fit for 1.5 degrees. There's a big gap here, and I think some of the elements which were not touched in Mr. Lies's report, looking at the reduction of the cap, making sure that supply and demand remains balanced through proper functioning of the market stability reserve, deserves a thorough second look. Second challenge I have when we talk about science-based facts is this notion of deindustrialization. It was mentioned several times, not only by you, Mr. Liese, but by the industry stakeholders on this panel. I don't see the evidence. We still do not see the evidence, and I don't think we can afford another decade to discuss whether carbon leakage is such a massive threat or not. So that needs to be documented better, that needs to be argued better, because the reality is about 200 billion euros worth in free emission allowances have been handed out until last year under the emissions trading system. The Commission's proposal foresees roughly 5 billion EUAs for free up to 2030. So at today's carbon price, that's another free pollution subsidy of around 400 billion euros. And I think the societal question we have to ask ourselves here is, what are we getting in return? Many of the sectors who have spoken before me, their greenhouse gas emission profile in the past decade is roughly flatlining. There's not much happening in those industries, and I do not think that's a surprise if you don't have a clear carbon price signal throughout the sectors applied. Where is your incentive to decarbonize? Adding to that, I think it is regrettable that what Mr. Liese has proposed would lead to even more free emission allowances coming towards those sectors. It's the shipping sector, it's the aviation sector, it's also the market stability reserve. All these aspects will contribute to increasing the share of free emission allowances, and then the notion of needing to avoid the cross-sectoral correction factor actually becomes a license to pollute for free for as much as you like, for as long as you like. And we don't think that is the balanced and the right way forward. A few thoughts on things which were not mentioned before. I think there were a lot of ideas included in the report looking at carbon capture and storage, carbon capture and use, where Mr. Liese went significantly beyond the European Commission's proposal. Also the approach of the European Commission to actually look at certification mechanisms up to 2030 and then maybe later. Here, this would allow effectively companies to use carbon removals, carbon capture and utilization to offset their emissions, basically offering an escape hatch for pollution, hiding emissions behind creative accounting. We think that's highly premature. This is not to say that those negative emission technologies deserve a place in a smart climate policy mix, but then it would be wiser to make sure this receives dedicated technology innovation support through, for example, auctioning emission allowances and using the funding mechanisms. And I'll leave it with that. In the interest of time, we still have a Q&A to go, so I'll hand over back to you. Thank you very much, Andre.
Well, thanks. Look, I don't usually do very well with mea culpas, and I'm not doing very well when people start talking to me about balance. But the only thing that I will acknowledge this time is that I kind of screwed up a little bit, in the sense that I should have done a better arrangement in speakers. It does happen, and there's no conspiracy theory. I don't want to sound like Nixon now. So my only contribution to this, even though I'm dying to say something, But if I'm sharing, I shouldn't be saying much. But my only contribution to this is I came into this on the back of the SO2 market in the States. And that's where I learned it all being auctioned, and it was simple and stupid, and we all understood it. I think that this is great, but this is getting very complicated. This is getting to be a little bit like the tax code, where it was supposed to be simple and you put a cap and people do, kind of manage in some way to reach that cap and come back with the number of allowances back. It's beginning to have band-aids everywhere. And this makes it incomprehensible for the average person. I'm not sure the average person is totally interested in this, but nevertheless, those average people that are interested are simply not going to be able to understand this. I think it has a social license to operate. I would really urge people to think about the amount of complications and the amount of things that kind of are overlapping and not really helping much in that way, in my opinion. Actually, probably disagree with.
No, I don't disagree with you on many points. I think we agree. I think what is important is we are discussing about free allocation. And then my question is, what is more important, free allocation or achieving the objectives? Please, let's work on achieving the objectives by 2030 and keep the room for those who want and need to invest now, that they can also be profitable, because otherwise, why should you invest? I think even the NGOs should understand that. And there, I think there are interesting proposals by Peter Liese, for example, on the conditionality. One can work on that, that you get lower free allocation or reductions in free allocation if you do not achieve a certain target. Let's talk about that, for example. And I just to be a bit more concrete, again, we as a steel industry have very concrete projects. They are on the shelf. Some have started. Now we have applied with a number of projects on the hydrogen IPCI. In November, suddenly the Commission said, yeah, but the hydrogen IPCI is only for infrastructure measures, not for industry. So we can restart applying. But if the companies have reiterated in my meeting just before this with the CEOs that they have to take the investment decisions this year at the latest next year. Otherwise, no possibility to achieve the objective. You know all how difficult it is to get permits for new installations, for infrastructures. The infrastructures are not there. The energy supply is not there. We can now install facilities that use hydrogen, but the hydrogen is not there. And that will also now not be there only green hydrogen. We will not have the amount by 2030 we will need. So we need also a transition there. And then the cost factor, again, the price plays a role. And now again, if we decarbonize, achieve our objective, 30% in just 10 years, or now it's 9 years reduction, we still have a shortage in free allocation of 45% with the current Commission proposal. Our shortage in 2030 will be 75% as a steel industry. Then even the best performer has no chance in the market anymore. And you have, even with the CBAM, it will become difficult because exporters to the EU export between 1% and 5% of their steel production to the EU. But we have to pay the carbon price on every single ton of CO2. That means for an average plant with 4 million tons of steel production, that our costs will be 400 million euros, and that for exporters to the EU, a comparable size of plant between 10 and 30 million tons euros. So please, let's talk about how to achieve the target efficiently, and just saying deindustrialization is not taking place, that's completely untrue. Maybe for other reasons so far deindustrialization is taking place because the carbon price was very low, we all know that, but now the carbon price is very high, and that will also lead to deindustrialization as a consequence if we don't do it correctly the transition. Yeah. So please let's discuss this, how to achieve the target and not to remove free allocation as the only option.
Okay, thank you, Axel. I promoted some Andreas Brieger, who I think we should. Sam, you'll bear with me for one moment, because the people that have taken the time to join us should get the floor also. I think that's only fair. Andreas, are you there? If you're not there, okay.
Yes, I'm there.
Okay, if you introduce yourself briefly and try and make it not another 5 minutes, but a very short point if you have.
Sure, thank you. Andreas Brieger from the German Confederation of Trade Unions in the Brussels office. As a social partner, we are also very interested in the topic, and I'm an advisor on industrial policy and climate policy. I would have liked to have two questions to Peter Liese, but I might as well ask you to the other stakeholders here. One of the we don't have a clear-cut position yet on all those very complicated issues, and it's a tons of issue at one time. So we are wondering, do you have any idea, do you have any viewpoint on the idea of having a maximum price in an ETS to ensure the planning security for industries, fair competition, and social sustainability? And the second question is, how do you see the coordination of all those files with other Fit for 50 files? Peter elaborated a little bit on that. So we're looking at the social climate fund in particular. So those are questions. Maybe one of you wants to elaborate on that. If not, take it as just a little commentary. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. There are people from member states, people that have stayed from Mr. Liese's office, and and from the commission on this, and they will take the floor as they see fit. Sam, you get the floor because you were last at the end, and you're gracious with Peter. I think that got you a few brownie points. Go ahead, Sam.
Thank you very much. No, I think, I mean, I do want to challenge some of the numbers which were raised by Axel earlier. I think you only get to these type of shortages of free emission allowances if you rely on very high growth rates, and probably there is some. I would like to see how the waste gases are treated underneath these numbers, because historically the steel industry has been extremely intransparent in terms of clarifying what amount of emission allowances are needed in the electricity sector, let alone what type of price they receive for handing those over, and that's a shortcoming in the discussion. It makes it very difficult because there's asymmetric access to information. I can say that, and I can testify that steel industry frontrunners come to us NGOs these days to ask how it is possible, when they have cleaner production methods and facilities and investments waiting, that the current emissions trading system is holding them back and is actively protecting the incumbents in the sector. I mean, something must have gone wrong then, if that's the case, and you can see that already by some companies in the steel value chain launching a court case against the European Commission in the way that the benchmarks under the ETS have been defined. So it's really important not only to look at the front runners and how they can thrive, but also at the incumbents. So I mean, looking at Mr. Liese's report, the bonus is just as important as strengthening the malus in there. And we're very mindful. The need here is to make sure these industries can stay and can invest in the European Union, that they can thrive. I mean, a lot of jobs depend on those. I'm extremely mindful of that. But what we don't need is another decade of flatlining carbon pollution, and that needs to change fundamentally, including through the ETS giving a proper price signal and ensuring that polluters can pay.
I see my friend Thomas Kruscher, but first Daniele Agostini was first before you, Thomas. Daniele from NL.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. I'll just be quick. I mean, on free allocation, us in the power sector, we're a bit sitting on the fence because it doesn't really regard us directly. However, I have to say I'm a bit fascinated by the fact that if I look at the state of the ETS numbers of the roundtable, we see a pretty flat curve in terms of the improvements that we've seen in industry in recent years. I understand from my colleagues from industries that we need more time to enable them to actually abate. So just a question to all panelists, given the recent, the last 5 or 6 years of carbon transit industrial emissions, how quickly do you see industrial emissions falling in the next 5 to 10 years? Sam, you seem to imply that the steel sector is actually ready to decarbonize rather quickly. So generally, I'd like to get some feedback on how quickly do you see abatement happening in the industrial sector? Thank you.
Thank you, Daniela, and thanks for the reference to the state of the ETS report that we started to work on now. Tomasz, you have the floor, and then we'll go back to the panelists for the closing remarks. So Tomasz, let's try it.
Okay, thank you very much. And well, that is fascinating discussion. And on the other hand, I must say that I've been part of this kind of discussions since, since the birth of the EU ETS and this debate whether the industry, particularly the energy intensive industry, deserves having free allocation could be, put in some dissertations of historians. But my remark is the following. All the products of the industry, steel, that would also apply to cement, glass, lime, all these products are badly needed for the improved infrastructure, and we need improved infrastructure for adapting to climate change. And all these products will be needed for improved energy efficiency. And it doesn't matter whether the buildings and transportation gets eventually included in the EU ETS, we will definitely need to improve the efficiency of buildings. We will definitely need more efficient pumps, more efficient heating systems, etc., etc. And for all these, we will need steel, we will need cement, etc., etc. Getting rid of free allocations too quickly leads to very direct raise of prices, and I'm afraid that taking into account the limited capacity of European steel industry, of European industry at all, we will need to bring the stuff from the outside of the EU, which would definitely increase the carbon content of imported goods. And we see it in the reports from the UN, the reports from Global Sustainability Index, that the EU is not leading the world in consumed CO2. That's unfortunate truth that we have to take into account and that we have to consider when taking final decisions on the shape of the EU ETS. And just one maybe not directly linked
let's wrap up, Tomasz, please.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. That we must, when taking this kind of decisions, take into account much longer perspective than even decade. I'm just reading the information from the International Energy Agency, Gas Union, International Gas Union, that the EU decided to change gas import pricing mechanism from oil indexation to market-based. And over the 15 years, we saved, as Europe, 70 billion. But last year, we lost 30 billion. And when seeing the level of prices of gas, we may lose the remaining 40 billion very quickly. Well, let's keep it this in mind, that this market that is linked with energy prices, that is linked with raw materials prices, is quite inert, and the very negative consequences of too quick actions may come. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I'll go in in reverse order. I think that it is only fair. Sam, you're back on the field. I think you have a very active conversation with Axel. But go ahead, please.
Okay,
closing remarks from everyone, please.
Thanks, Andre.
Let's try and keep it to a minute and a half if possible.
Yeah, I'll do my best, because I don't have much to say. We covered a lot of ground already. I believe the next decade for the ETS should really look at some of the remarkable progress which has been made in the power sector in terms of decarbonizing. Emission reductions, I think over 40, probably now close to 45% since the last trading phase started. And this is where really the heavy lifting took place. The heavy lifting took place even to such an extent that oversupply remained on the market, and this is what has depressed carbon prices for a very long time. We're out of those woods, fortunately, I would say right now. But again, when listening at this discussion, there is still a large gap to close to ensure that major emitting sectors in the energy intensive industries are going to move forward on the same track, and we are looking at two sides of the same coin there. Every euro we have can only be spent once. It's the same for the emission allowances. Either you hand them out for free or you auction them. But if you auction them, then at least there is a stream of income which can be smartly reinvested. And to me, that's part of the positive story here, and a virtuous cycle to pursue, that those revenues can also help to ensure that industrial decarbonization is taken forward. The Innovation Fund, for example, I'll just leave it there. There is hope there. So I'll conclude with that. Thank you very much.
So is there hope, Domin?
Definitely is hope. And unsurprisingly, I guess I very much agree with everything or much that Sam has said. And as you said, I mean, we are in a crucial decade, and we do see a lot of industrials doing actual investments. And we do see member states getting serious about industrial decarbonization. Like, the technologies are there, the money is getting there. We're seeing some very big funds being put in place in Germany, in the Netherlands, etc. And the ETS needs to contribute to this as well. ETS on its own is not going to do it the way it is set up right now. The rules around free allocation, carbon leakage, etc., are there to protect incumbents, not to support these low carbon technologies and these front runners. And we need to get this revision right in the next few years in order to ensure that the next decade will support those front runners and not just protect those incumbents. I'll stop there. Thanks again for the invitation, Andre.
Good to see you, Domin. Eva? I think you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. No, I think that a lot of sensible things have been said here. We tend to remember the industry that no one in Europe wants to make their lives difficult, but we have targets and we have to get there. And I think that the power sector is an inspiration. We got the carbon signal very, very early, and we had to adapt, and the result has been very good. So we think that you need help, but you need to keep the pace going on. And well, sometimes I think that we have to build a system in which, of course, we get a balance, but business as usual is not good.
Well, thank you, Eva. And I've got in order Jakob and Liv and Axel, and I remind you also that Daniele Agostini had a question. So if you want to address that, but let's start with Jakob.
Yes, thank you, Andre. I want to comment first on what Thomas said very briefly, pointing to the high gas price. And it is, the very high gas price is a catastrophe for an industry like mine, which are using a lot of gas, where the gas is 80–90% of variable costs. So we are really under strain. And one of the reasons is, of course, we could go to green energy, but it is not here yet. I'm looking at Eva again, but it's not here yet, because we could use that, but it takes a lot of energy. So I think one of the things I would like to make the point is that we need in transition period also to think about how do we get the energy we need until we become green. So I think that's something that's missing in discussion and which should be taken into the ETS system as well. And the last aspect, just to, because nobody has said it here, it's also about regional aspects. You know, in the fertilizer industry, we are fairly evenly spread across Europe. But the potential and the ease with which you can find alternative energy to help you avoid the future ETS costs is not the same all across Europe. And I do think we need to find what Lisa talked about earlier, to have a balance. But I also think we need to have a balance between regions, so that in areas where it's more difficult to invest in new technology because the energy is not there, then we need to think about how can they also compete with the ETS system. And that's what I wanted to make here, Andrew. I think the regional aspects are not highlighted enough in this discussion.
We have discussed this. We have discussed this, and we're thinking about that, Jakob. Liv?
Yeah, thank you. We also consider this period, the 10 years we are starting in now, as a very crucial period. And I started to say, with saying that we have a clear goal. We are going to reduce our greenhouse gases by 30% compared to 2018 level. That's quite challenging. It doesn't give us any benefit from a commercial perspective. It only gives us additional cost, which our competitor doesn't face. And we don't stop in 2030. As I said, we are going to net zero. So it's very important, as I also said in the beginning, we are faced with a 6 times higher CO2 price than the best other region in the world. So I don't think we should think so bad about industries in Europe, because we are front runners, all the sectors. And for aluminium sector, all technologies are not there. Yes, we can use hydrogen, and we hope to use hydrogen where we can use hydrogen. And we are going into more and more recycling, because that is also a very important part to go through. But with regards to, there are some areas where we're looking into technologies. Technology is not there, and we were looking at these technology possibilities for decades, and we are pushing it more and more and more. So be patient, we are doing our best. And I would like to add something about the prices, because today we have in this mechanism that is sort of regulating if the price increase. Is that the way it should be regulated? Should it be looked at differently in regards to, should it be a price triggering coming in like they're doing in California? I just mentioned it. We need to have flexibility, and we need to protect industries, because I think European industries are doing their best these times. Thank you.
Thank you. Axel, last.
Very briefly, because I have already spoken quite a long time, I think it will be very important to further fine-tune the proposals. I think we should all sit together even more often. I'm ready to have a discussion with the NGOs to go through our issues, to create a bit better understanding among each other. On the question from the German trade unionist, social fund coordination, I'm not in the detail, but I can assure you that we are discussing this with the European umbrella organization Industrial to find and support from the side of the steel industry a better just transition in this whole Fit for 55 transition package, and that includes, of course, the ETS proposal. So I think it's very, let's say, a step forward what Mr. Liese has proposed in that regard, and we are happy to discuss also how this can further be fine-tuned. Thanks a lot, and I wish you all a good day.
Well, thank you all, and I thank Peter, Lisa for taking the time. I thank you all for joining, and those that have come in to listen. I do go back to my roots and why I got into this initially. What was the intellectual attraction? I remember Justin Becker coming in and saying, keep it simple. It is getting complicated. And I think that the complication will then lead to arbitrages and other things that we don't want. We want to keep it simple. The simplicity is what drives this mechanism. Now, from ERCST, we will continue this. We have started the state of ETS, and some of the issues that you have heard here, we will try and deepen and not only have discussions with you, also produce original intellectual input. We are a think tank in the end, and we hope that we contribute intellectually to this. Again, I don't want to keep you any longer than this. It's demanding to do all this discussion an hour and a half. Sorry for interrupting and cutting off people. I hope I did it graciously enough that nobody hates me at the end of this. Thank you, and we shall see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.